Hello, dreamers, and welcome to the 263rd episode of California Dreaming. I have a few notes about the show before we get started. This is still an independent one-woman, three-puppy show, which means we depend on you, the listeners, to keep us going. And there are a number of ways that you can help. You can follow on social media, join the Facebook group, follow me on Instagram and Twitter, where I post about new episodes and pictures that go along with them. You can recommend us in true crime fan and discussion groups. You can leave a nice rating and review on whatever platforms you listen to your podcasts on. And if you have an extra $1 or $2 a month, you can subscribe to Patreon, where you will gain access to dozens of episodes that you won't hear anywhere else. And if you would like to make a one-time donation, you can do so through PayPal using the email californiapod@gmail.com. Also, for the month of June, I'm having a giveaway. I have 100 Pride stickers. All you have to do is send me your mailing information to the same email, californiapod@gmail.com, and I'll be sending those out in the next couple weeks. You do not have to be a Patreon subscriber to get one, just the first 100 people to email me. I never get 100 people to email me for anything, so you'll likely get one. All right, let's get on with today's episode. Our story takes place in the city of Tustin, California, which is located in the heart of Orange County. It's one of those nice little cities that's kind of tucked between some major attractions and big cities, and Tustin has all of these freeways that go around it and through it. The 5, the 55, the 22, the 405, the 261. And if you're on any of those freeways and you blink, you will totally miss Tustin. To me, Tustin always seemed like a place where people lived. I don't ever really remember going there necessarily for anything in particular, with the exception of the Tustin Marketplace, which I really like. But mostly I would pass through to get to other destinations, and that's mainly because I would be on one of those freeways that I mentioned headed somewhere else. I think that we may have talked about Tustin in the past, but I'm not sure if we've ever had a story that actually took place there. Until today. Fun fact, the late child rapist, Mary Kay Letourneau, was born and raised in Tustin. Oh, and convicted sexual predator, Cuba Gooding Jr., also resided in Tustin for a period of time during his adolescence. So yeah, notable residence yet infamous. Despite that, Tustin is one of the nicest cities in Orange County to live in, and it is also considered among the safest in Orange County. But back on Mother's Day of 2011, this wasn't the case. At least not for one family. And that's what we're going to talk about today in this episode of California Dreaming, the tale of Mother's Day and the botched murder-suicide. I first want to let you know that in this story, I found a couple of discrepancies. In a documentary that I watched about this, it was said that this event happened in the morning, but in the court documents, it said it happened in the afternoon. So I'll tell you what the documentary said, and then I'll remind you of this discrepancy when I get to it in the court papers. On the morning of Sunday, May 8th, 2011, shortly after 9 in the morning, a frantic 911 call came in from a then 16-year-old Tony Gana. He yelled to the operator, "My mom shot me with a gun. My mom shot me with a gun." The operator had a hard time understanding what he was saying and had to ask him to repeat himself twice, saying, "Sir, you're talking too fast. I can't understand you." Tony slowed down and for a third time said, "My mom shot me with a gun. I'm bleeding. I'm bleeding all over the floor. She just shot me right now in the arm. I'm bleeding." Moments earlier, Tony, his younger brother Alfonso, who was only 9 years old at the time, and their father, Antonio, who was quite a bit older for having young children, he was 73 years old at this time, making him 30 years older than his wife, the three of them together hurried into the master bedroom of the house after hearing a loud bang coming from that direction. As they made their way into the room, Tony recalled hearing his little brother commenting that it smelled like gunpowder. which would definitely be concerning to smell inside your home. As they made their way towards the direction of the bang, Tony suddenly noticed that his mother, Annamaria, was in there with a gun in her hand. And then she opened fire. Tony darted out of the room, but as he got to the rear exit of the house, he stopped for a minute and thought to himself, this can't actually be happening. It didn't make any sense. And when he turned around, he saw his mother advancing towards him. And he raised up his hands and he said, "Don't shoot, don't shoot." At the same time, trying to understand this juxtaposition of his mother standing there with a gun about to shoot him. Of course, none of this made any sense. And as I wrote this story, I've realized that there have not been very many children that we've heard from that survived this. Watching your parent or your mom, your dad, coming at you with the intentions of ending you. But in this story, we do have survivors. But not everyone made it out of the Gana home alive that Mother's Day. As the first officers arrived at the scene, they encountered two people covered in blood lying on the floor inside the home. And at least one of them was still alive. The first question that was asked is the most important question that needs to be answered before the answers can no longer be obtained, should both of these people die. So the officer asked, "Who did this?" And one of them said, "I did it. Shoot me, please, kill me." That's when the officers realized that they weren't going to have to search long and hard to find the person responsible for this. Going back in time about 7 months earlier, in October of 2010, Tony and Alfonso's maternal grandmother, Evelyn, who lived in the Philippines, received a call from their mother, her daughter, Annamaria. She said that she and Antonio, her husband of almost 20 years, were just leaving an appointment that Annamaria had with her doctor, where she received some distressing news. She, at the age of 41, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she wanted her mother to be the first to hear the news. For Evelyn, being told that her daughter had cancer was like being told her daughter had just been handed a death sentence. While that isn't necessarily true, it's different for everyone depending on how early or how late the diagnosis is made. It can very much be treated, but Evelyn, she freaked out and flew immediately from Manila to Orange County, California. The following month, Evelyn was right there with her daughter as she began the treatment for cancer. They had found out Annamaria had stage 2 cancer, for which she ended up undergoing a double mastectomy. Evelyn pointed out that her daughter was also prescribed what she said were many drugs. And you're going to find that the cancer, the medications, the treatment, the chemotherapy, all of it is going to become an issue her family is going to point to and question later on when it comes to Annamaria's health. Not just her physical health, but rather her mental health and her state of mind. Evelyn said that when she became aware of all the things that Annamaria was going to have to take in order to treat and manage her health problems, it was of great concern to her because she Googled some of them and she wasn't liking what she was seeing in terms of side effects. Things such as depression, insomnia, delirium, just to name a few from a laundry list of potential side effects that these medications can have. The depression was the one that was of particular concern. But whenever Annamaria's mom would ask how things were going or how were things at the doctor's appointments, Annamaria was always telling her mom that everything was okay and that the doctor said that she was going to be just fine. So, taking her daughter's word for it, that everything was indeed okay, Evelyn went ahead and went home to the Philippines after being with her for about a month. That would be in December of 2010. However, just 4 months later, in April of 2011, Evelyn unexpectedly received a call from her son-in-law, Antonio. He wanted to know when she planned on coming back to California to visit them again. She said, "Well, I'll be coming to visit you guys soon." And Antonio kind of persisted and asked, "Well, when is soon? How soon is soon?" You see, Evelyn didn't want to spoil her surprise, but she decided to go ahead and tell Antonio that she had already had plans to fly to California the following month in May to pay her daughter and her 2 grandsons a surprise visit on Mother's Day. Speaking in Tagalog, Antonio commented that it was a long time to go yet. Reflecting back on that phone call, Evelyn thinks now that Antonio was trying to ask without asking for her to come sooner, if not immediately. Unfortunately, Evelyn did not pick up on this subtle hint. If he had been more forthcoming, if he had opened up and shared with his mother-in-law what was actually going on with his wife, if he was able to speak the words to her and tell her, "We need you," Evelyn said she would have been on the next flight out of Manila. But she didn't know. She had no idea how desperate the situation was becoming with her daughter and with her daughter's family. She simply did not know. Tony described his family as very loving, very close, very adoring, extremely devoted, especially his mom. He would say that for all of his life, he was much closer to his mother than he was to his father, but all in all, they were a tight-knit family. Annamaria showered her boys with love and all of her attention. He said that when his mom received her cancer diagnosis, he had just started high school, and at first his mom had a lot of optimism. She was keeping her spirits up, that she was going to fight this and she was going to beat this. Annamaria had a tremendous amount of hope about the future, and she remained that way for the weeks and months following as she began her treatment. But after a while, Tony described his mom's behavior and emotional and mental stability as beginning to noticeably change for the worse. It wasn't rapid. It was just kind of a slow deterioration with each passing day. She started eating less and less, and she began to stop interacting with her family and friends in social situations. Exacerbating everything was the fact that Annamaria was also battling insomnia, adding exhaustion into the mix, thus adding prescription medications into the mix as well. But according to Tony, the sleep medications had little to no effect. And while Annamaria tried to act like she was holding up well, her family still worried about her a lot. However, looking back at that time following the diagnosis and the double mastectomy, with the benefit of hindsight, it was more clear that Annamaria was not doing as well as she was letting on. In fact, based on the symptoms, they believed that it was depression that was setting in. On the morning of Mother's Day, 2011, about 7 months after Annamaria received her diagnosis, it was Sunday, May 8th, her eldest son, Tony, said that they had woken up sometime around 9 a.m. His dad was in the kitchen making breakfast for Annamaria for Mother's Day, and when it was ready, they got her up and they gathered around the dining table and they each gave Annamaria a gift, one from Dad and one from each of her boys. They did notice that Annamaria had slowed down a lot in the way that she moved, the way that she spoke. It was like in slow motion, and it had been that way during the week leading up to Mother's Day. So it wasn't too particularly alarming on that day. They figured it was just everything that she was having to go through related to her cancer treatments and the medications. It was taking its toll on their mom, physically, mentally, and emotionally. There were also times when Annamaria would be sitting very still, like she was frozen in time, and would just stare off into space without saying a word. It didn't even look like she was in any kind of deep thought or having a pensive moment, not even daydreaming, just sitting really, really still, completely oblivious to everything that was going on. So after giving Annamaria her gifts, her husband Antonio suggested that she go and lay down and try to get more rest. He helped her get up and walked her back down the hallway into the master bedroom. After breakfast, Tony went to relax in the living room, and just a few moments later, he heard that loud bang. His first thought was that the TV that was mounted to the wall may have fallen off, which is a thing sometimes I think when there are really big, huge TVs just hanging there, especially with an articulating arm. But anyway, Tony was looking around, kind of trying to figure out where that sound had come from. And from that point, Tony would say that his recall gets a little bit jumbled up. Understandably so when we find out what happened in the next few moments. But Tony did remember hearing his brother say that he thought that he was smelling gunpowder. The boys looked at their dad, and he immediately had a look of shock and fear because the immediate thought was, oh my God, she's killed herself. Antonio leapt to his feet and ran towards the master bedroom with Tony behind him and their youngest son, Alfonso, trailing behind. When Antonio opened the bedroom door, Annamaria was not laying on the bed or on the ground with a self-inflicted bullet wound. She was sitting on the bed, there in the middle of the room, with a gun pointed right at her husband and at her boys, stacked one behind the other at the door. Antonio immediately ran towards his wife to try and get the gun away from her, and that's when she opened fire, shooting him in the chest. Tony was standing in the doorway as he witnessed the whole thing. As soon as his dad hit the floor, Tony turned and ran down the hallway towards the kitchen, as the plan was to try to escape the house out the back door. But just as he was about to exit, he had this thought that this can't be real. There's no way that my mom just shot my dad, and there's no way that my mom is about to shoot me. So Tony paused in the kitchen, and he turned around and stood there. As he watched his mom advance towards him, she was still holding that gun, and it was indeed pointed right at him. Tony raised both of his hands and said to her, "Don't shoot, don't shoot." But she shot, striking Tony in the upper right arm, at which point he fell onto the kitchen floor. It took Tony a moment as he looked at the blood flowing from the bullet wound in his arm that he wasn't dead. So he hurried to his feet, grabbed his phone that was on the kitchen counter, and continued to run out the back door. In an interview, Tony stated, "I wasn't thinking about anyone else besides myself in that moment because I was afraid that I was going to die." Because remember, Tony's 9-year-old brother Alfonso is still somewhere in the house. Shortly thereafter is when Tony's 911 call went out over the police radios. So the responding officers heard and knew that this caller's mother had shot him and shot his dad, and that he was able to get out of the house. As the first officers arrived, the thing that they were finding to be really unnerving when they got there was the fact that they weren't hearing anything. It was eerily quiet. Usually shooting scenes, apparently, because I've never been at one, they're usually quite chaotic, and it sounded very much so on the 911 call. This one was confounding. Usually there's someone outside waiting. They are at least expecting to find the 911 caller who said in his call that he had fled the house. So they thought that he would be out there yelling for help, telling them where to find the other victims, showing them how to get into the house, but there was none of this. The reason is because backing up to the 911 call, after Tony explained to the dispatcher that his mom had shot him and he was bleeding from his arm, once that dispatcher understood that, she told him to get away from the house and away from where his mom would be able to see him. Tony said, "Okay, but my brother's in there. Please hurry up. Please, my brother's in there." From there, Tony ran to a neighbor's house. He pounded on her door, and as soon as she saw the blood and the injury to his arm, she panicked and also dialed 911. Then this neighbor started running towards the Gana home where the shooting had taken place because she started hearing sirens and was aware that they were on their way. She wanted to get Tony some medical attention as soon as possible, but obviously he isn't at the location of where the emergency responders are showing up at. As this neighbor is running towards the house, there is one Orange County Sheriff's unit there, the ones who were trying to figure out why everything was so quiet. They know that there's been a shooting. They know at least 2 people have been shot, and they know that they were shot by the mother of the caller. So when one deputy sees this woman running towards him, he has no idea who she is. And she has a small black object in her hand. This deputy suddenly turned his gun that he had pointed towards the house towards this woman instead, and she's coming up on him fast. And you know, this woman is so lucky that the deputy didn't shoot, because he continued to look at her hands as she got closer, and he realized that what she had was a phone, and he told her to stay away, which she did, and then this officer turned his attention back to the house. Soon, Tony saw the police, and he started yelling at them that his brother was still inside the house, and they assured him that they would get him out. So then Tony wondered about his dad. What about him? Why aren't they going to bring him out? So Tony started asking the officers about his father. He's in there too. Where's his dad? Why isn't he coming out? And the neighbor whose house Tony had ran to tried to assure Tony that his dad would be okay, but Tony had this feeling in the pit of his stomach that that wasn't going to be the case. And while he's having a million thoughts racing through his head, the one question that keeps cycling through is, why did she do this? And then the fear sunk in, because now what was going to happen? What was the future going to hold for them? As he is slowly coming to the realization that even though his mom shot his dad, whatever was going to happen to her next, Tony was certain that he was losing her that day too. And at the age of 16, he was going to have to spend the better part of the rest of his life trying to make sense out of something that was impossibly senseless. Backing up a few moments to when the deputy first was outside the house and his partner was providing backup. They're finding it, like I said, eerily tranquil after hearing such a frantic 911 call. He's confident that the neighbor running towards him wasn't the threat, so the deputy stood outside the home with his gun, just taking it all in. He was looking around, listening, and waiting for what, if anything, was going to happen next. And a few moments later, this deputy saw something moving near the front of the house. And soon, someone emerged from the front door and onto the porch. And this someone was walking towards the front lawn. It was a young child. And the deputy looked at this child's hands, and this time, this little boy had what looked to be like such a huge gun in his hand. So the boy is walking away from the house at a pretty rapid pace with this gun, and the deputy is standing there again. You know, he still has no idea what's happening, and we can only imagine what a shocking sight it would be to see a 9-year-old walking towards you with a gun. So this officer has his gun pointed at this child holding a gun, and he's wondering to himself, am I going to have to shoot this child on Mother's Day of all days? This deputy then started yelling as loudly and as profanely as he could for this boy to drop the gun. If this child refused to drop it and or made a sudden move or continued to advance towards the officer, this deputy was ready to shoot him. Fortunately, the child did as he was ordered and dropped the gun onto the front lawn. And when he dropped the gun, he then began running in their direction. And he pretty much leapt into his neighbor's arms, who was standing right there. She picked him up and held him tight. It was then the deputy could see the sheer terror all over this child's face. And in his interview that I watched, this deputy teared up, reflecting back on that moment when the child was in the safety of someone's arms that he was familiar with. Because what nobody knew yet was that almost every single important person in that boy's life had been shot. And you know, this deputy, when he was shouting at that boy to drop the gun, he wasn't being polite. His demands were loaded with F-bombs and 4 letters like you would never in your life ever imagine yourself speaking to a child in that way. Unless you yourself are an F-bomb and a 4-letter kind of a person, then you might do something like that. This deputy was feeling the weight of being a part of the reason why this child had that sheer look of terror in his eyes, not only with his words, but with his gun. And having come within the blink of an eye of putting a bullet into this child, just like the rest of his family. It was very scary to think about those moments, and not everybody has them. These life or death, forever life-changing moments. This officer could have blown this child away, and he would have most likely been found to be justified in doing so. The way this officer became choked up recalling that moment, you can tell that he is thankful, abundantly thankful that he did not have to do that on that day. Once the child was safe, the deputies next turned their attention to the home. They began to make their approach towards the front door, and the closer they got, they started to hear what sounded like moaning coming from inside, and it sounded like someone who was quickly approaching the final moments of their life. Meanwhile, over in the Philippines, at the airport in Manila, it used to be called the Manila International Airport. Now it's known as the Ninoy Aquino International Airport. Annamaria's mom was fixing to board her flight to California for her surprise visit, the one that she had told Antonio about the month before when they spoke on the phone. While she was there at the airport, Evelyn just so happened to run into Antonio's adult son and daughter from his first marriage. So when she saw them, she went over to say hello and said, "That's funny, it looks like we're getting on the same flight." What Evelyn didn't know is Antonio's son was getting on that flight in order to get over to California because he had gotten word that his dad had been shot. And before he could say anything, Antonio's daughter angrily interjected and said, "You didn't hear what happened?" Evelyn was confused and said, "No, what happened?" She said, "Your daughter shot my dad, and she shot Tony." And that was the state of Evelyn's mind that she had to sit with for the entire 15-hour flight from Manila to Orange County, California. The whole way she was trying to put it all together in her head. What the hell happened? That's how Evelyn got the news as to what was going on with her daughter and her daughter's family. Deputies back at the scene of the shooting cautiously made their way into the Gana home. They were following the sounds of the moaning that they were hearing, which was coming from a bedroom at the end of the hallway. So they go that way. When the deputies opened the door leading them into the room where the moans were coming from, they discovered two people lying on the floor in the bedroom covered in blood. The two people were lying face to face and were locked in an embrace, but completely soaked in a pool of blood. We know who the people on the ground are, but the deputies at the scene, they had no idea. They just know what they heard on the 911 call. "My mom shot me." The older of the two people on the ground they could see had a gunshot wound to his chest. So one of them began to look for signs of life, and the other person was lying there, and that person was crying. But because this other person was bald, the officers mistakenly assumed that this is a second male victim. So at that point, they believed for the moment that the shooter was still someplace else. The deputy could see that the bald individual was still alive, so he said, "Who did this?" And then he repeated himself, "Who did this?" That is when he heard the voice of a female coming from her say, "I did. Please kill me." At that point, the deputies realized that they had the shooter right there. This was the mom that shot everyone. The blood that she had all over herself was Antonio's. The deputy said that when the woman on the ground was asking him to kill her, the look in her eyes was one of those kinds of stares that goes right through you. He believed that this woman was in a state of shock, that her mind was processing the fact that she had just shot her husband to death, yet she laid down on the ground to put her arms around him. Tony, in the meantime, was transported to the hospital where he received medical treatment for the gunshot wound to his arm. The person who stayed by Tony's side the entire time that he was there was another deputy with the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Tony doesn't know who that deputy was, but all he knew was that he had to be there because nobody else could be. It brought Tony a great deal of comfort to have that deputy there as he recovered from his injuries, since both of his parents were gone from his life for good. It was a very lonely stay in the hospital for this young man, save for that one deputy. As Tony worked through his physical recovery, he began to fall apart emotionally as the gravity of what took place with his family in their home began to sink in. Tony became overwhelmed with this sense of hopelessness and sadness and despair. Laying in that hospital bed, he felt like he was drowning. He felt trapped. It was hard to breathe. It was hard to think. He didn't know where his dad was at. He didn't know what was going to happen to his mom. And most importantly, he had no clue where his little brother was either. Tony's despair and sadness soon then turned to anger. He became very, very angry with his mother, and he couldn't quite understand how she could be so evil. But that's how Tony came to view her, pure evil. And the thought of her, his own mother, terrified him. He could not wrap his head around what she had done or why she would do such a thing to them. For all of his life, Tony believed in his mom. He believed in her love, that she adored him and his dad and his little brother. For years, she showered them with affection. She loved them. So he thought. If that was the case, then how could she? How could she take his dad away from them? How could she try to end him too? In Annamaria's initial recorded interview that was conducted while she was still hospitalized, she answered the questions that she was asked pretty matter-of-factly. She was asked what happened, and she explained that she fired the gun at the ceiling first. When she was asked why she did that, she said so her husband and 2 sons would be drawn into the bedroom. She said, "My husband came in first, so I shot him. Then I was going to shoot my 2 sons, and then I was going to shoot myself. I wanted my whole family to go with me. No one was going to suffer after my death." But then the officer asked, "Was that when you were trying to shoot yourself in the side of the neck or in the head, where you have this big powder burn?" Annamaria has some injury to the right side of her neck. It's a large black mark with some redness. And she said yes, that's what she was trying to do. She was asked when it was she started to come up with this idea of taking her family's life and her own, and she said she thought about it every night for 2 weeks. Then she was asked what stopped her from doing it on those days, and she answered that she was scared and wouldn't be able to do it. She was asked what changed her mind that day, and she said she told herself in her mind that she could finally do it. At some point in her interview, Annamaria said, "I'm sorry, my plan didn't work out. It was supposed to be the 4 of us." Annamaria's mom took issue with the fact that the sheriff's detectives conducted that interview the next morning, the day after the shooting at around 8 a.m., because, as you heard, Annamaria provided a full confession. She was Mirandized and all that jazz ahead of time, and proceeded to answer questions without having an attorney present. Evelyn believed that they should not have spoken to her. She did not believe that her daughter was capable of answering questions or understanding what was going on because she wasn't in her right mind. There are pictures of Annamaria, and she does look kind of like she has that 1,000-yard stare. Evelyn believed her daughter to be insane at the time of the shooting, and the following morning when she was questioned, this was still the case. And she strongly believed that if her daughter was in a proper state and frame of mind, that she would have never done something such as this. And she believed that all of these events are a result of Annamaria having sunk into a deep depression caused by her cancer diagnosis and the subsequent treatments, particularly the medications that she was prescribed, and that those had a detrimental effect on her mental health. She believed that Annamaria became depressed, possibly hallucinated, and ultimately lost touch with reality. She said that Annamaria and Antonio were very much in love, and that the only reason this happened, the only reason that Annamaria shot and killed him, is because she snapped. And the picture of her daughter that they took that day or the day after, she will point to that picture as proof positive that the mugshot they took of Annamaria that day after the killing, that's how you could tell, just looking at her face and her affect, that she's not well. And I'll post it on social media when this episode goes live. So dreamers, I have not been close to someone who has dealt with cancer. And what I mean by that is on a day-to-day basis, somebody who's going through it start to finish. I've never experienced that. Cancer does not run in my family. I have not had close friends who have been diagnosed. I've known people who've had cancer, who've survived, and have told me about it, but there's nobody who I was with and sat by their side from day one and every day following. So I don't know, and I can't speak to the toll that the diagnosis and the treatments can have on the patient and the impact that it has on the family as a whole. So I don't have anything to share on that. I don't have any opinions. You're free to come onto the Facebook group where we talk about this kind of stuff. So if you want to open up about it, you can. Some of you have reached out to me in the past and have said, hey, I've listened to your show because it helped me get through this. It helped me relax. It helped get my mind off things. So other than that, I can't speak to being closely involved with anybody who's ever gone through something like this. But what I do know is that everybody reacts differently to this news when someone finds out that they have cancer. And it all depends on what kind of cancer, how early the diagnosis was made, what treatments are available, if treatment is available, how aggressive the cancer is. There are so many factors, and everyone's experience is unique, and how they react to it is also uniquely their own. There might be initial fear and shock and sadness, and then it might turn into something that they're ready to fight back against. Some people are open and honest about their diagnosis. Other people are private about it. And yeah, some people may very well become quite depressed. Breast cancer is rough. Having a double mastectomy as a woman, it can be devastating. Prescription medications can wreak havoc on our bodies with all of the crazy side effects. But there are two things that I know for a fact in this case. One is not everybody in a situation similar to Annamaria's does what she did. Not everybody attempts to annihilate their entire family. In fact, very, very few people do. And two, today, 12 years after the fact, the anniversary of this just passed. Mother's Day was just a couple weekends ago. Annamaria is still alive today. She's 53 years old. She murdered her husband and attempted to murder her children just 6 months after receiving the news that she had stage 2 breast cancer. The 5-year survival rate for stage 2 breast cancer is 92%. Prognosis is good because it hasn't spread beyond the breast. I don't know what the status of Annamaria's cancer is today, but as I said, she's still alive and it's been 12 years. And the last I heard, as I read through articles on this, she has been cancer-free ever since. If Antonio were to have survived, he would have been 85 years old today. Tony would be around 28 and Alfonso would be 22. She would have seen her husband into the final years of his life, and she would have seen her children into adulthood. The thing that she said in her police interview that really rubbed me the wrong way was how she said she wanted to take her family with her when her prognosis was decent, and she's still here. But anyway, like I said, feel free to share your opinions or experiences in the Facebook group when this episode goes live, because like I said, this is beyond the scope of anything that I've ever had to deal with in my life. After Annamaria was taken into custody, 9-year-old Alfonso was also interviewed. I watched some clips of it, and he stated, before the gunshots, it was Mother's Day, and we gave her like the presents and stuff. She was happy. Then he said my mom was sitting up and had a gun in her hand, and I think she shot my dad first. I hid like in a room, and I was there with a pillow covering my face and stuff. And then I saw my mom on the ground. I saw the gun pointed at her head, and she shot it, but I think there was no bullets left because she was still alive. So I went out and told my mom, like, calm down and stuff, but she wouldn't, so I took the gun. And then I heard the police coming, so I went outside with the gun and they told me to put the gun down, and I did. So this kid just watched his mom shoot his dad to death. He knew his brother had been shot too. And then he watched as his mother tried to kill herself, but she missed. And yet, this young man had the wherewithal and his wits about him enough to try to not only get his mom to calm down, but to also get the gun away from her. And remember, the deputy who first arrived on the scene encountered him outside holding the gun and with a barrage of expletives screamed at this boy to drop it, which he did. There were so many moments when this child could have been shot by either his own mom or by the people who were sent there to save him. And it's a miracle that this boy made it out of this whole thing in one piece. The only one in his family to do so. It's amazing to me. And he amazed everyone involved in this whole ordeal. There was an article I read about this case that described 9-year-old Alfonso having wrestled away the gun from his mom and described him as a hero. I'm not sure if it was that dramatic, but it kind of sounds like it. Like it really could have gone down like that. But he described not being able to calm his mom down. So it seems like she was on some level in a very heightened state of emotion when he did manage to get that gun away from her. And as the first responding deputy pointed out in his interview, this is what these two children had to look forward to on every single Mother's Day for the rest of their lives. This is what this woman left behind for them to try and work through, process, and deal with. It's a tragedy that they're going to have to relive every year for the rest of their lives. So Evelyn arrived in California from the Philippines. She went straight to the hospital where Tony was being treated for his gunshot wound. She had to literally sit on this 13-14 hour flight, however many hours, having heard the news the way she heard it from her dead son-in-law's older children that her daughter executed him. Many, many tears were shed on what was supposed to have been a fun vacation for her. Evelyn's trip, which had meant to be a special Mother's Day surprise, turned into a Mother's Day nightmare. And it also suddenly became her responsibility to now take care of Tony and Alfonso. And while Tony was in the hospital and his grandma was trying to work out getting to Alfonso, he had been placed in a foster home for several days because he had no place else to go until grandma was able to officially be granted custody. In his interviews, older brother Tony said that he really didn't know what to say to Alfonso when he saw him because he was pretty angry with his mom and he really couldn't visit that on a 9-year-old who was having to go through the exact same tragedy that he was going through. And while Tony does acknowledge that his mom was dealing with a lot with the breast cancer, the treatment, the medications, and it all may have been having an effect on her, but he couldn't let go of the fact that his dad was dead, that he was almost dead, and that his mom did all this. He can't simply excuse it all away that easily. In fact, Tony readily admitted his anger manifested into this hatred for his mom to a point where he couldn't even tolerate her name being spoken. And he had even made a promise to himself to never have anything to do with her for the rest of his life. The Orange County District Attorney's Office worked out the charges they intended to levy against Annamaria, which were going to be premeditated first-degree murder with the special circumstance of lying in wait. And while those charges in and of themselves made Annamaria eligible for the death penalty, the DA opted to seek a term of life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the district attorney contacted Tony and asked him if he was good with those charges and the potential sentencing guidelines, Tony was like, absolutely, I'm good with that. He never wanted to see his mom out of jail ever again. He had no intentions of having a relationship with her, and he certainly would never forgive her, and was very much on board with her being kept behind bars forever. And it is not very often that we have children make that drastic of a turn against their parent who does something like this. I mean, even Chad Daybell's kids have publicly stood by him and expressed their support of him, despite the fact that we know he did what he did. And what I mean by that is he killed their mom. In their case, though, Chad Daybell's children have someone else to blame that is as equally awful and evil as their father in Lori Vallow. In Tony's case, there is nobody else to blame but Annamaria. Her mother managed to diminish the amount of blame that she places on her daughter by ascribing blame on the medications, but Tony, even though he acknowledged that the potential impact the medications had on his mom's mental health and state of mind may have played a factor, he wasn't willing to allow that to be an excuse for it. Tony told the district attorney to have his mom locked up and to throw away the key. In a July 2011 article I found on news.abs.cbn.com, which is a Filipino news website, Annamaria's attorney gave a statement to the media providing an update about her and her case. She pleaded not guilty to all the charges and would be continuing being treated for cancer and having her health be monitored by the medical staff in the jail. Annamaria's attorney said that despite the charges that she was facing, she was in high spirits, stating, quote, "She's lost her husband, she's away from her kids, but in view of all that, she's doing okay. She's got a lot of emotional pain that she has to deal with, as well as physical pain because of the cancer." Annamaria was facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison. Of the boys, Annamaria's attorney said that since their father had been killed, the boys were looking at being left without either one of their parents and think that whatever was to happen, they would undoubtedly be without parents until they chose at a later date as to whether or not they would want to have a relationship with their mother. But despite these tragic events, they were going to have to get back to having as normal of a life as possible, including sports and activities after school, and Tony was just about to earn his driver's license. They stayed with a friend of the family until their grandmother was able to make all the arrangements to have the children live with her, and with her attorney adding, the family has come together by way across the world's largest ocean. Folks have come in from the Philippines, aunts and uncles from both sides of the family, from Antonio's family and from Annamaria's, to support the kids and their mother, and the family has always been that way. While awaiting trial, Annamaria finished her chemotherapy treatments, and in March of 2013, a little less than 2 years after the shooting, she stood trial for the murder of her husband and the attempted murder of her sons. And at her trial, her defense was what we've been discussing, that her cancer diagnosis, medical condition, and medications were to blame. At trial, both of Annamaria's sons testified. When describing the shooting, Tony, who was 18 years old by the time of trial, said, "I heard this loud noise. Alfonso yelled that it was a gunshot, and then my dad got up, ran into the bedroom, and Alfonso and I were right behind him. I stopped at the doorway. My dad rushed in, and I saw my mom holding a gun. Then my dad tried to grab the gun from her. I saw him get shot, and Alfonso and I ran away. I reached the kitchen, but then I stopped because I didn't believe that it was real. I turned around, I saw Alfonso hiding behind one of the couches, and then I saw my mother chasing after me with a gun. I yelled at her, 'Don't shoot.' Then she shot me and I fell to the ground. I heard another gunshot, and I thought it was for me, but it wasn't. Then I saw Alfonso taking the gun away from my mom, and that's when I ran out and called 911. Tony further described his mom as looking as if she was possessed. Her eyes were wide open and looked much bigger than they normally would, with absolutely no other emotions on her face. Alfonso testified too. By the time Annamaria was on trial, he was 11 years old. He said that after his mom shot and wounded his brother, he saw her point the gun at her head and fired it. She then started crying and saying, 'What did I do? What did I do?' That is when Alfonso picked up the gun that she had dropped on the floor and left to try and find Tony. Responding officers found Annamaria lying on the ground embracing Antonio as he lay bleeding from the gunshot wound to his chest. He was transported to a nearby hospital but was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. It was determined that Antonio's gunshot wound was consistent with the way the boys described the shooting having occurred. He had no stippling or gunpowder residue on his body, meaning he was standing at least 2 feet away from the barrel of the gun when it was discharged. When paramedics first attended to Annamaria at the scene, they asked her a series of questions, but she did not respond. She just laid there with her eyes wide open, staring right through them. They assessed her at the scene as having some level of altered consciousness. When Annamaria was brought to the hospital, a tube was inserted in order to help assist her breathing. The sheriff deputy who was assigned to stand guard and watched her testified that when she woke up in the morning after the shooting, She removed the breathing tube herself and began saying things along the lines of wanting to die. Annamaria repeated these statements to the doctor and the nurses who attended to her, telling them that she killed her husband and shot her children. The initial interview that detectives conducted with Annamaria, I shared portions of it with you earlier, and I mentioned that she was questioned while she was still at the hospital. She was indeed advised of her Miranda rights and agreed to waive them and to provide a statement. She told them that late in 2010, just 6 months earlier, she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. She said at the time of the shooting she was undergoing chemotherapy and was also being prescribed Ambien to help her sleep. She also said that she was under a great deal of stress due to the financial problems of a business that she and her husband operated, and it wasn't doing well. Annamaria stated that she and her husband were in the process of trying to sell the business, but she was worried that they weren't going to be able to, and she claimed that with everything going on, the cancer, her medical problems, related health issues, and the financial pressures and a failing business, she had become overwhelmed with everything. So this business, Annamaria and Antonio owned a UPS mail center franchise. They also owned a second home in another part of Tustin that they used for a rental income. Like several other cases that we have talked about in the past, the recession of 2008 had a severe impact on them, like millions of others across the United States. And when the economy and the housing market tanked, Annamaria and Antonio had no choice but to sell their main home and move into their smaller rental property. I mentioned at the beginning that Antonio was much older than Annamaria, 30 years. They had met back in the early 90s in the Philippines, and when Antonio retired in 2007, they moved to Tustin. That was only 1 year prior to the start of the recession. That was 2008 when the economy tanked. Then in 2010, Annamaria received a cancer diagnosis. So it was like one massive blow after another, all in a matter of 3 years. Essentially, Antonio and Annamaria had only 1 year that was drama-free here in the United States. So Annamaria said that for several weeks prior to the shooting, she claimed to have been having suicidal thoughts and also began to develop this plan to kill her husband and her children before taking her own life as well. She described to the detectives that she had been hearing voices in her head telling her that she needed to carry out this murder-suicide plan. Remember at the beginning when I told you that there was a discrepancy about the time of day that this event took place? Well, in the court documents it said that on the morning of the shooting, Annamaria told detectives that she had loaded the gun. What was said to have happened next was what was in the documentary. Antonio made breakfast and they all gave Annamaria her Mother's Day gifts. Then, because she started to look tired, Antonio took her back to the bedroom to lay down and rest. The court document said that some friends had come over to visit that afternoon. After the friends left, Annamaria went back into the bedroom. She retrieved the gun that she had loaded earlier in the day and fired one shot into the ceiling in order to draw her family into the room. She recocked the weapon, and when her husband entered the bedroom, she aimed at his heart and shot him. Then she ran after her sons who had both fled the room, and she was able to shoot her older son one time in the arm. She thought that she either shot or shot at her younger son as well before turning the gun on herself. According to her version of the story, the reason why the shot she intended for herself missed was because Alfonso grabbed the gun from her just as it discharged, leaving that powder burn on her neck. She acknowledged telling the first responding officers that she wanted to die. Annamaria's defense attorneys called to the stand medical experts to provide testimony regarding her physical and mental condition prior to the shooting. The oncologist treating her testified that Annamaria had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. After undergoing a double mastectomy, she was placed on a chemotherapy regimen that involved 4 different drugs. The drugs can cause patients to suffer memory loss, fatigue, difficulty remaining focused, as well as exhaustion. Because Annamaria had also developed a rash that was a side effect of the cancer medications that she was taking, she was prescribed steroids that also had side effects, including psychosis, mood disorders, and insomnia. The Ambien that she had been prescribed for the insomnia also had the potential to cause psychosis in rare circumstances. However, in the oncologist's notes, it was indicated that while Annamaria had complained of a loss of appetite, fatigue, a skin rash, and losing her hair, along with the insomnia, she did not mention suffering from depression, mood changes, or psychosis. A psychiatrist who met with and interviewed Annamaria testified as to his opinion that she was suffering from a psychotic depression on the day of the shooting. He claimed that this condition resulted from a combination of facts, including both her depression as well as the medications that she was taking. It appeared that Annamaria was experiencing a delirium, which is kind of a fluctuating level of consciousness due to a medical illness that caused her to have worsening symptoms of depression and worsening psychoses, he stated. A psychologist was called to testify on behalf of the defense as well, and he stated that Annamaria was suffering from a clinically significant major depression when he interviewed her. He concluded that at the time of the shooting, Annamaria's thoughts and/or beliefs and actions were related to a severe mental state, specific psychiatric condition, and not to asocial psychopathological character trait. Annamaria also testified on her own behalf. She claimed that she began feeling depressed during the second cycle of her chemotherapy. She said that when she developed a rash from the medications, she found it difficult to sleep. The oncologist prescribed Ambien to help her sleep and some medications for her rash. She also testified that she lost her appetite, she felt weak and fatigued, and she had difficulty reading. On the day of the shooting, Annamaria testified that she was sad, depressed, tired, and not feeling normal. She recalled having breakfast with her family and the arrival of her friends who visited them that afternoon to watch the Lakers game, and to trying to work on some paperwork for the business. Annamaria had gone to her bedroom to get some sleep and to be alone. That's when she began feeling helpless, feeling depressed, and feeling like every single problem was a major problem. During her direct examination, Annamaria said that she remembered getting the gun, recognizing what it was, seeing bullets, and wanting to die, but she could not remember loading the gun. She remembered hearing a gunshot, seeing her husband and her children enter into the bedroom, being in the living room with her older son, and her younger son calling her name. But she did not remember aiming and firing the gun at any of them. She claimed the next thing she remembered was embracing her husband in the bedroom, then seeing people, being in an ambulance, and waking up in the hospital. During cross-examination, the prosecutor asked Annamaria about an entry in the psychiatrist's report, where she said to him that she began planning how she might kill herself during lunch on the day of the shooting and loaded the weapon shortly thereafter. She said that she did not recall making that statement during her interview with him. In the psychiatrist's notes, it also said that Annamaria expressed the belief that her family would not be able to live without her, that she needed to kill them so that they could all die together and nobody had to suffer. On the stand, Annamaria denied having any recollection of making the statement. She was also asked about the statement she made to the psychologist where she stated, "We're all going to die because everyone was getting sick." Again, Annamaria denied having any recollection of making the statement as well. Annamaria testified that her recollection of the events at the hospital following the shooting were just as vague. She recalled seeing a nurse, a sheriff deputy, speaking with the investigators, and also learning the news that her husband was dead but her children were okay. She denied having any memory of what she said to the investigators, even when the audio tape of her interrogation in the hospital was played for the court. On Wednesday, April 3, 2012, Annamaria was convicted of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder for her botched Mother's Day murder-suicide plan. Her sentencing hearing would be held 2 months later in June, where she would learn whether or not she would spend the rest of her life in prison. According to an article on CBS.com, the jurors deliberated over the course of 2 days before returning their unanimous verdict, and they also found the special circumstance of lying in wait to also be true, as well as the enhancement of shooting a gun causing a death and shooting a gun causing great bodily injury. In a statement following the verdict, the prosecutor said, "Your heart can break for people who are depressed, but murder-suicide should never be an acceptable way of dealing with those feelings. As a society, morally and legally, murder-suicide should never be an option." In a rare move and in a show of mercy, in June of 2013, the presiding judge on Annamaria's case reduced her first-degree murder conviction down to a second-degree murder conviction, and the judge struck from the conviction the special circumstance of lying in wait, and the judge did so per the request of one of Annamaria's sons. About a year after the trial, Annamaria's children, along with their grandmother, her mother, went to visit her in prison for the first time. Of this, Tony said that he had finally come to be at peace with what had happened. His anger at his mom and what she had done had subsided. He took the time that he needed in order to get to that place. When he asked his mom about her memories of what happened that day, she said that she blocked everything. She claimed to have no memory of what happened. Tony saw it as his mom's way of protecting herself from the hurt and the pain, a defense mechanism. But he doesn't know if she's just saying it's blocked out of her mind or if she truly has no recollection of what happened, which he says may be attributed to the prescription drugs that she was taking at the time of the shooting. So as this time has passed, that's what Tony had decided that is what he was going to believe to have been the root cause of what his mother did and why she did it, that it really wasn't her, it was the drugs. Tony has said that his mother has apologized an innumerable amount of times since the shooting, telling him each time that she doesn't ever expect him to accept her apologies, but she will continue to try for the rest of her life. And while Tony will never be able to make excuses for his mother killing his father and trying to kill him and his little brother, but he does believe that the sorrow and the regret that his mom has expressed is genuine. He can't fully get over the fact that he lost his father and that he suffered this gunshot wound, even though he believes her to have been criminally insane, even though our justice system would have technically excused her. But even then, if she were found to be not guilty by reason of insanity, she would probably be institutionalized for a very long time, if not forever. Tony's lost too much sleep. He's cried too many tears. He's contemplated taking his own life, and he will say that the blame for that lies with his mother as well, and for that, he would prefer her to be kept in prison for the rest of her natural life. The gunshot wound that he suffered caused Tony permanent paralysis in his right hand, and his mother has been cancer-free ever since the shooting. Annamaria's mother, Evelyn, believes a life sentence is too harsh if one were to take into consideration the mitigating circumstances. And while she has heard many things about the way things are within the walls of prison, and I'm sure it's ugly, but it's certainly not meant to be fun, Annamaria continually reassures her mom that she's doing all right, but she doesn't feel like Annamaria is being totally honest about that. And every time she drives away from a prison visit, she cries for her daughter. It pains her to see her child having to go through what she's been through. And while it's very easy to feel sorry for the pain that Evelyn has had to endure as a result of her daughter's actions, for me, I have to be honest with you, dreamers, my empathy can only go so far when you take into consideration the pain that Annamaria caused Antonio's family, his children, his grandchildren. They've all had to go on in life without their father and their grandpa. Tony and Alfonso had to witness what they witnessed, and it sounds to me like Tony is probably suffering from PTSD. Annamaria isn't in prison to hurt her mom or to make her mom cry. That's just a side effect. She's in prison for the wreckage that she left in her wake. I wonder if Evelyn had arrived a day earlier than her planned trip to California, if she would have been there. She would have been drawn into that bedroom when her daughter fired that first shot into the ceiling meant to lure her family into the room where she would be able to ambush them all. She managed to murder Antonio because he was the first one through the door. But that gun was pretty big and heavy, and every time it had to be fired, it was a revolver, so it had to be cocked. The hammer had to be pulled back. If Annamaria had had a semi-automatic handgun, she would have killed them all. But even with a revolver, the only reason she didn't kill her boys was because they were young and fast. I just wondered, what if Evelyn was there? Would she have been able to outrun her daughter like her grandchildren managed to do so? I just think it's a little bit easier for Annamaria's mother to blame and point fingers at other things, finances, cancer, medication, doctors, etc. But the reality is, you can't put those things in prison for murder. Evelyn continues to defend her daughter, insisting that she's a good person whom she's very proud of, stating in an interview, "I know that she's a survivor. What happened doesn't haunt me. I just cannot imagine that it happened because knowing they're a very loving family. I don't think that they could shout at each other. And I can only go back to the medicines. I still cry a lot. I don't know why it happened to a happy family." Her grandson Tony does not agree with that notion, but he would point out that his mom was a survivor in part due to his father and how much he adored her. When Annamaria was diagnosed with cancer, his whole life evolved around taking care of her. 30 years younger than him, and he's taking care of her. So the fact that she would return the favor by shooting him through the heart only compounds that devastation for their son, Tony, because he wasn't just there for Annamaria, he was there for his boys too, until she ripped him from their lives. In June of 2013, a judge reduced Annamaria's first-degree murder conviction to second degree, and the special circumstance of murder by lying in wait was struck down. This was requested by one of her sons. Which son it was that asked Annamaria's conviction to be reduced isn't specified, but from the interview that I watched with Tony, I'm under the impression that it would be her younger son, Alfonso, that advocated for the lesser sentencing guidelines. Annamaria was nonetheless sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. At her sentencing, she stated in part, "No words can describe the pain of my loved ones and the pain my husband's loved ones are feeling. This tragedy does not make sense to me. I feel very terrible and I am deeply and truly sorry." Today, Annamaria is housed at the California Institution for Women in Chico, California. She's 53 years old and will become eligible for parole in 2031. A petition for the governor of California to set Annamaria free was created a year ago on change.org. It reads, "In May of 2011, Annamaria Gana was a loving wife and mother of two battling aggressive breast cancer. She underwent chemotherapy and was prescribed a heavy regimen of medications, including drugs well known to have side effects of depression, fatigue, agitation, psychosis, and confusion. Facing a grim prognosis, consumed with despair and suicidal ideation, and affected by the many prescribed medications that she was taking, Annamaria experienced a psychotic break which led to her conviction. Annamaria was sentenced to 40 years to life. At the time of her sentencing, even the district attorney appealed to the judge, recommending instead a second-degree murder sentencing. I'm not quite sure if the district attorney would necessarily do that, because I did read an article that it was one of her sons that asked for the lesser conviction sentencing. Perhaps the DA spoke up on behalf of that son, but I don't know. It's so rare for the district attorney to actually request a lighter sentence. But anyway, she will not be eligible for parole until 2031. Her behavior has been exemplary during her incarceration. She is a wonderful person who is thoughtful, compassionate, and selfless, always willing to give her time in the service of others. Circumstances that led to her lengthy sentencing have been repealed under California law, such as the mandatory 25-year to life gun enhancement that she received. During her time at the California Institution for Women in Corona, well, the change.org petition says Corona, but it's actually in Chico, Annamaria has sought to understand this tragedy. Now, dreamers, I'm not sure about that sentiment either, because Annamaria readily claims that she has no memory of the events of that day. So if she doesn't remember it, or if she says that she doesn't remember it, then I don't know if you can genuinely try to understand it. But anyway, it goes on. She spends her time taking courses, coordinating events to help fellow inmates, and trying to make amends for the incident that has left her family anguished. She is deeply remorseful and seeks release so she can care for her aging mother and her 2 sons. She has shown incredible accountability and consideration for those affected, above herself and any self-interest. During a decade of incarceration, Annamaria has utilized each opportunity available to further educate herself, as well as donate her time to others. We hope that you will have compassion for the effects of mental illness on Annamaria's decision-making skills and release her to her loving and supportive family and community. Thank you. The petition has received 1,850 signatures out of the 2,500 it was seeking to obtain. I didn't sign it. Because I watched the interview with Tony, it kind of hit hard. I wasn't as moved by his grandmother's attempts to champion for her daughter as I was by Tony's suffering and what he's had to endure since the shooting and will have to continue to live with for the rest of his life. So dreamers, let me know in the comments on the social media posts, all those places on Twitter and Instagram, what you think about this story and how it all played out. How do you feel about Annamaria and the circumstances of her life at the time of the shooting? Do you think she deserves a break? Does she deserve to be released after only serving 10 years of a 40 to life? Or is her having the chance to one day being paroled enough of a break? That she should serve her time out for the murder of her husband and attempted murder of her own children? Or should she be given a pass? Let me know. I'm curious. As an outsider looking in, I can see how easy it is to look at this woman and feel very sorry for the tough times that she faced from the time that she and her family moved to the United States. But the one thing that bothers me so much was the selfishness of wanting to die and to take her family with her. There's a part of me that feels terribly for anyone who chooses suicide and leaves young children behind. But then to decide to play God while she was at it and attempt to take them all out with her. But at the same time, I also don't want to ignore the fact that maybe she was experiencing some sort of psychosis as a result of her cancer treatment and medications. But then again, like I said, there are many people who are diagnosed with a serious and potentially life-threatening disease that don't choose murder-suicide. And it sounds like she beat cancer. Recent pictures of her, she looks quite healthy and beautiful. And that's in spite of being locked up since 2011. So I don't know where I stand here. Her son wants her in prison for the rest of her life, which is a possibility. And he can go and speak at her parole hearings and express his opinions. So then we have to ask ourselves, how much consideration should he be given as not only the victim, but also her son? All right, that's all I got this week. I will be back next week with the next installment of this podcast. Thank you for listening, and until next time, sweet dreams.